Hello. With Kotor being remade by Aspire Media and Saber Interactive, let us continue taking some time to talk about my favorite aspect of both RPGs, the companions we made along the way. Knights of the Old Republic had 9 companions, from the cool Cathar Juhani to the exiled Wookiee muscle Zalbar. There is also one beautiful boy in Trask. Oh, gorgeous Trask. It pains me that our time was cut short by that mean man aboard the Endar Spire. You'll always be in our hearts. Today I'd like to discuss Carth's original story in the game, as well as examples of what could be done to enhance the character. Of course keeping the underlying character, only adding what may make him more interesting. Spoilers for Knights of the Old Republic are going to be abound ahead, so please listen after beating the game. I want to admit something now that may surprise you guys. I am not a fan of Carth. He does a lot that should be compelling. He loses a wife and son, and he was betrayed by his mentor. He's a devoted soldier, but perhaps the way this story is written, a moderately surly man with baggage doesn't engage with me. A guy who's a survivor, a man whose wife died in his arms, who lost his son and thought him dead, and yet I have to force myself to engage with him, either platonically or as one of the only 3 romance options in the game. He's like a poorly made white bread, and his character was better realized in Caden Alenko in Mass Effect, played by the same voice actor. Why tell you this? That I am passionately disinterested in this milquetoast excuse of a character, because I think he can be better. Well, it's true I think he's boring. That's more because the presentation, I think. So what will we do differently? In our enhanced version of Carth, I want to see something a little different. Still the best soldier, still untrusting, but more snippy and to the point. This man lost his wife and child to his mentor, and seems like he's just fine. I would like to see a Carth who analyzes situations, seeing the unusual and suspicious as a survival mechanism, but who's quietly broken, trying to ignore his trauma. Why is Carth one of the best soldiers? Was it Saul's Duelich? Did his skills continue to carry him? Maybe it could have been his drive for vengeance after his wife's death, and perhaps it was that he dove into his work because he couldn't bear to think about her dying in his arms. The grief too much to process after losing wife and son. I imagine Carth being closer to the edge than we see in game. After pulling you from the wreckage of your escape pod on Taurus and getting to an apartment, the player would wake up from their visions of Bastila and Revan to Carth practicing his martial arts in the apartment. Seeing the player awake, he'd talk to them about their objectives to get Bastila and find a way off planet as soon as possible. Carth would admit to having surveyed the area nearby for some information, having been rebuked because people sensed he was with the Republic and feared Sith retribution. If the player says that they have no interest in rescuing Bastila, Carth will state that he won't need them then, and the consequences to the player not helping is that he would find and save her and get off world without them. Carth would then state it would be faster and more effective if they did work together. Carth in this new version would still slowly open up, but only after the player shows a real effort towards saving Bastila. He is more ruthless than before. When Mission is encountered in the Undercity, I'd have him ask her what she can offer to them in exchange for helping save Zalbar. When Mission explains her set of skills, he would then advise to help as she could be a valuable asset to the Republic if her slicing abilities were to be believed. They made their way to Dantooine, where a Jedi enclave exists. Carth, at this point of the game, has no mission, no purpose. He just has to wait for the player and Bastila to train on a world similar to what his planet was like before the bombardment. I think this should mess him up. This is a planet that isn't yet touched by the ravages of war. A planet that, at least for this moment, is peaceful. Oftentimes a person can manage just fine whilst in a crisis situation, but when they find themselves at peace, they crumple as they experience the delayed effects of what they would have felt in a crisis. This could be the first moment Carth has had no orders or a crisis since he lost his wife and son. It could finally be a moment to unlock his grieving, although I don't think it would be willingly. I see a moment whilst the player is doing their Jedi training where one of the other companions comes to the player, stating Carth locked himself in the cargo hold for some reason. The player would then be able to choose to go to Carth or not. Going to him would have the player learning of Carth having PTSD over his wife's death at the hands of his mentor through the steady conversation with the player. The player would then be able to comfort him or chide him for cracking under pressure. If the player comforted him, Carth would reveal that he had a son, and that his son may have died in the bombardment of Telos, but that they never saw the body. With this, the player would gain Carth's tenuous trust, which would grow over time and on different missions. After a couple of star maps would be gained, Carth would call for you, stating that he gained information about his son, that he wasn't dead, but that he had been spotted upon Korriban in the Sith Academy. Carth would ask that when the player goes to Korriban to take him with them, so that he could try and convince his son to leave the Sith. If the player takes Carth to Korriban, he encounters his son. As an aside, Dustil in my mind should have been captured by the Sith and personally interrogated and brainwashed by Admiral Saul as a ploy to break Carth's spirit. Dustil would explain how he lost all faith in the Sith, all faith in the Republic, and all faith in his father, since he never came to save him. He would further explain that he was found to be Force sensitive, and that it took him away from Saul's machinations, but that he only decided to learn of the Force through the Sith Academy to grow in power to protect himself so that he would not need to trust anyone ever again, paralleling his father's inability to trust. The point of Carth's quest with his son in our enhanced version would be to convince Dustil to leave the Academy. Not to help the Republic, not to reconcile with Carth, just to convince him that going down the path he's going is dangerous, and that even leaving to explore the galaxy would be better than staying. This would take the player and Carth going and breaking into the headmaster's office to try and find information to convince Dustil. A datapad with a plan to kill one of Dustil's training partners would be able to be found by the player like the original, though instead of having the death already happen, like in the original, it is something that is going to happen. Going back to Dustil and talking to him, he'd call out how suspicious this is, and how convenient it is that the player and Carth were able to muster up a datapad with something this compelling, to which the player would then be able to convince Dustil to go and find his training partner, who would be revealed to be his closest friend. Dustil, the player, and Carth would run over to a secluded area within the caves to find his partner being attacked by some of Dustil's greatest rivals. Dustil would instantly run in to defend their friend. The player would be able to assist in the fight. After defeating the attackers, Dustil's training partner would tell the player, Carth and Dustil, that some of their rivals caught them unawares in the caves somehow, to which Dustil would tell them about the headmaster's deception to pull Dustil closer to the dark side. Dustil and their partner would then talk to the player about where they could go, where the player can choose to convince them to leave and find a way off-world. Convincing them to disappear would be the easiest option, with telling them to join the Jedi Order as a middle option, and rejoining the Republic being the hardest option to get him to agree to. Carth and Dustil would then go talk to each other away from the player, and when Carth comes back, he would thank the player for helping him start the reconciliation process with his son, citing that he doesn't think they will be able to truly begin the process until the war is over. I think the changes we made to this quest could improve Carth's story greatly. It shows Saul still has stock in Carth and still wants to turn him to his side. It shows that Carth being away on tour had an effect on his son, and it shows his son as similar, but different from his father. Dustil would be hesitant to join the Republic, having a closer affiliation to the Jedi since he could learn from them to protect himself and those he cared for. After helping Carth save his son and getting off of Korriban, Carth would pull the player aside once they had gone back to the Ebon Hawk to state that they now trusted him as much as they possibly could, thanking them for helping in saving his son. When the sequence aboard the Leviathan happens, and the crew are captured, Carth finds himself once again face to face with his wife's murderer. I see a calm and bitter Carth here. Saul would offer Carth a chance to join him once again, but Carth would deny it by saying any chance of that died when his wife died by Saul's orders. Carth would state that he knew Saul tortured his son like he was going to do to them now, and that by the end of this, either he or Saul would be dead. This would rattle Saul, who would start his torture of Bastila, Carth, and the player. When the three would escape confinement and make their way to the bridge, Carth would state that although he wants to kill Saul right now, they may be able to get some information from him, and that they should try and squeeze anything from him before they kill him. He would also state that Saul must die, and that was non-negotiable. In the fight, Saul would taunt Carth, whispering something in his ear before the fight begins. After the fight concludes, we would see Carth angry at Bastila, who would avert his scorn by stating that they could talk about it when they got off the ship. After Bastila stalls Malik, Carth and the player escape on the Ebon Hawk. Carth tells everyone that you were Revan, though if he trusts you from saving his son and listening to him throughout the game, he would then state that he trusts you implicitly, hoping that the others would as well. If you haven't gained his trust, he would need further convincing by other companions. The last change I envision for Carth is on the unknown world. If the player betrays him by falling to the dark side, Carth would rally as many of the companions as he could against you, and then run into the ship with them to disable it, knowing that without you coming aboard the Starforge, the Republic has a slight chance of victory. He would then die by the player's hand, trying to break the hyperdrive further so the player couldn't leave the planet. So what do you think of this new Carth? Is he enhanced from the original, or not as good? I think these rewrites to his character keeps the character's underlying themes whilst making them more compelling. But you may disagree. Please tell me your ideas for enhancements to Carth as well as the other companions in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and have sweet dreams.